The crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over the Riverside Country Club's grand ballroom, where Chicago's elite had gathered to celebrate Martha Whitmore's 60th birthday. Designer gowns swished across marble floors as guests mingled beneath towering floral arrangements that cost more than most people's monthly salary. The air buzzed with polite conversation and the gentle clink of champagne glasses. Martha sat at the head table, regal in her emerald silk dress, accepting birthday wishes with the grace of someone accustomed to being the center of attention. Her silver hair was perfectly styled, and despite her age, she carried herself with the poise of a woman who had never known real hardship, at least not recently. "Mom, you look absolutely stunning tonight," Tiffany gushed, adjusting her mother's diamond necklace. Tiffany herself was a vision in designer pink, her blonde hair swept into an elaborate updo that had taken 3 hours at the salon. Every detail of her appearance screamed money, from her custom Louboutin heels to the tennis bracelet that caught the light with every gesture. Richard, her husband, stood nearby in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, chest puffed with pride as he surveyed the lavish party he had funded. "Nothing's too good for my mother-in-law," he declared to anyone within earshot. "This party cost more than most people's cars, but Martha deserves the best." The guests nodded approvingly. Richard was a successful pharmaceutical executive, and his generosity was legendary among their social circle. He had a way of mentioning the cost of things that made people both impressed and slightly uncomfortable. "Where did you find those orchids?" asked Mrs. Henderson, one of Martha's bridge partners. "They're absolutely divine. Chow flown in from Thailand this morning," Richard replied, straightening his gold cufflinks. "Cost a fortune, but when you love someone..." He shrugged, as if money meant nothing to him. Tiffany beamed at her husband's words. She had worked hard to cultivate this image of the perfect daughter, the one who had stayed close to home, married well, and never caused her mother a moment's worry. Unlike her sister. "It's such a shame Elena couldn't make it," said Mrs. Patterson, though her tone suggested she wasn't particularly disappointed. 10 years is such a long time to be away from family." Martha's smile faltered slightly. "Yes, well, some people have different priorities," she said, her voice carrying a hint of bitterness that she tried to mask with maternal disappointment. "Don't worry about Elena tonight, Mom," Tiffany said, placing a protective hand on her mother's shoulder. "This is your night. You're surrounded by people who actually care about you." The massive oak doors at the entrance suddenly swung open, and a hush fell over the nearest guests. A woman stepped into the ballroom, and for a moment, time seemed suspended. She wore a simple black blazer and matching trousers, the kind of understated elegance that spoke of confidence rather than wealth. Her dark hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail, and she carried herself with a quiet dignity that made the elaborate gowns around her seem almost gaudy by comparison. Eleanor Whitmore had returned. The whispers started immediately, rippling through the crowd like wildfire. "Is that really her? After all these years? She has some nerve showing up here." Elena's eyes swept the room, taking in the opulent decorations, the shocked faces, the life that had continued without her. Her gaze finally settled on her mother, and for a brief moment something vulnerable flickered across her features before she composed herself again. Tiffany's champagne glass trembled in her hand as she spotted her sister. The color drained from her face before returning in an angry flush. "What is she doing here?" she hissed to Richard, who was staring at Elena with a mixture of confusion and disdain. "I have no idea," Richard muttered. "But she's got a lot of nerve showing up after abandoning her family." Eleanor began walking through the crowd, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. Guests parted before her, some out of curiosity, others out of discomfort. She moved with purpose, but there was something almost ethereal about her presence, as if she existed in a different world from the rest of them. "Eleanor?" Martha's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried across the suddenly quiet room. Elena stopped a few feet from the head table, her eyes meeting her mother's for the first time in a decade. "Hello, Mother. Happy birthday." The simple words hung in the air like a challenge, and everyone in the room seemed to hold their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The silence stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Martha's eyes filled with a complex mixture of emotions: surprise, hurt, and something that might have been longing before it hardened into disappointment. She didn't stand to embrace her daughter. She didn't even smile. 10 years, Martha said, her voice carrying across the hushed ballroom. 10 years without a single visit, and you choose tonight to make your grand entrance. Elena's composure never wavered, though those who looked closely might have noticed the slight tightening around her eyes. "I know my timing might seem, Might seem what, convenient? Tiffany's voice cut through the air like a blade as she stepped forward, her designer heels clicking aggressively against the marble. You disappear when Mom gets sick, when she needs us most, and now you waltz in here like nothing happened. The guests shifted uncomfortably, some moving closer to hear better, others backing away from what was clearly becoming a family confrontation. Richard moved to stand behind his wife, his presence a silent show of support. "Tiffany, please," Elena said quietly. "This isn't the place." "Oh, but it is exactly the place," Tiffany interrupted, her voice rising with each word. She grabbed a fresh champagne glass from a passing waiter and raised it high. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please?" The murmur of conversation died completely. Even the waitstaff stopped moving, sensing the drama about to unfold. Tiffany climbed the 3 steps to the small stage where the band had been playing earlier, her pink gown rustling with each movement. "I was going to wait until later for the toast, but it seems we have a special guest tonight." Her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Look who decided to grace us with her presence. After a decade of playing hide-and-seek around the world, my dear sister, Eleanor." A few uncomfortable chuckles rippled through the crowd. Eleanor stood perfectly still, her hands clasped in front of her, watching her sister with an expression that revealed nothing. "I hope you brought an expensive gift, Eleanor, because my husband Richard paid for every single penny of this beautiful celebration." Tiffany gestured grandly around the opulent ballroom, the flowers, the champagne, the orchestra, all of it, because that's what family does. They show up, they take care of each other. Richard straightened his shoulders, basking in the public acknowledgement of his generosity. Several guests nodded approvingly in his direction. "But I suppose we shouldn't expect too much," Tiffany continued, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "After all, we all know Elena doesn't have a pot to piss in. While she was off gallivanting around the world, chasing whatever fantasy she thought was more important than family, Richard and I were here. We were the ones holding Mum's hand during her treatments. We were the ones making sure she had everything she needed." Martha's face had gone pale, but she made no move to stop her daughter's public evisceration of Elena. If anything, she seemed to be drawing strength from Tiffany's words. "Do you know what it's like?" Tiffany's voice cracked with manufactured emotion. "To watch your mother suffer while your sister is nowhere to be found? Do you know what it's like to get the phone calls at 3 in the morning when she's scared and in pain, and you're the only one there?" Elena's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but she remained silent. "But thank God for Richard," Tiffany continued, reaching down to squeeze her husband's hand. "Thank God I married a man who understands what family means, a man successful enough to make sure Mum gets the best care money can buy." Richard stepped forward, his chest swelling with pride. "It's been an honor to take care of Martha," he announced to the room. "When family abandons you, sometimes you have to rely on the family you choose." The words hit their target. Eleanor's composure flickered for just a moment, a flash of pain crossing her features before she regained control. Martha slowly rose from her chair, and the room fell even quieter if that was possible. She moved with the careful dignity of someone who had learned to live with chronic pain, accepting the microphone that Tiffany handed down to her. "My daughter is right," Martha said, her voice trembling slightly. "Tiffany and Richard have been my angels. When the doctors told me about my condition, when they said I needed that expensive medication, Vitalis X, to stay alive, I thought I was going to be a burden to my children." She paused, looking directly at Elena. "I never imagined that one of my children would simply disappear." The guests murmured sympathetically. Several women dabbed at their eyes with cocktail napkins. $800 a month for medication, Martha continued, her voice growing stronger. $800 that might as well have been $8,000 for all I could afford it. But Richard stepped up. He made sure I never missed a dose, never had to choose between my medicine and my rent. Eleanor's hands clenched slightly at her sides, but her face remained a mask of calm. "So yes," Martha concluded, looking around the room at the faces of her friends and family, "I am grateful. Grateful for the daughter who stayed, and the son-in-law who treats me like his own mother. Some people talk about family loyalty, others live it." She handed the microphone back to Tiffany, who was practically glowing with vindication. The applause that followed was polite but enthusiastic, and Elena found herself standing alone in a room full of people who clearly saw her as the villain in this story. Eleanor glanced at her watch, a simple, elegant timepiece that looked almost plain compared to the jewelry glittering around the room. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth, so brief that most people missed it entirely. The applause was still echoing through the ballroom when the massive oak doors swung open again. This time, however, the entrance commanded immediate and absolute attention. A distinguished man in his 60s stepped into the room, his silver hair perfectly groomed and his charcoal suit impeccably tailored. He moved with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room he entered. Dr. Jonathan Sterling, director of Chicago General Hospital and one of the most respected medical professionals in the Midwest, paused in the doorway and scanned the crowd with sharp, intelligent eyes. The effect was instantaneous. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Champagne glasses froze halfway to lips. Even the waitstaff seemed to sense that something significant was happening. "Is that—" Mrs. Henderson whispered to her companion. "Dr. Sterling," came the awed reply. "What on earth is he doing here?" Richard's eyes lit up like a child's on Christmas morning. He practically bounced on his toes as he recognized the medical luminary. This was his moment, his chance to network with one of the most influential doctors in the city. Without hesitation, he abandoned his position next to Tiffany and strode across the ballroom, his hand already extended in greeting. "Dr. Sterling!" Richard's voice boomed across the room, causing several guests to wince at the volume. "What an incredible honor to have you at my party. I'm Richard Blackwood, Senior Vice President of Pharmaceutical Sales at MedTech Solutions." He reached Dr. Sterling with the enthusiasm of a golden retriever, his smile so wide it looked painful. "I can't believe you're here. This is absolutely fantastic. I've been following your work for years, the cardiac research, the innovative treatment protocols. You're a legend in the medical community." Dr. Sterling looked at Richard with the polite but distant expression of someone trying to place a face. His eyes moved past Richard as if he were transparent, scanning the crowd behind him. "I'm sorry," Dr. Sterling said coolly, "but I believe there's been a misunderstanding. This isn't your party." Richard's smile faltered slightly, but he pressed on with the determination of a man who had built his career on aggressive networking. "Well, technically it's my mother-in-law's birthday party, but I organized everything, paid for everything. I'd love to discuss some of the new medications we're bringing to market. I think you'd find our latest cardiac drugs particularly interesting." Dr. Sterling's gaze had found what he was looking for. His entire demeanor shifted, a warm smile replacing his professional politeness as he spotted Elena standing quietly near the head table. Without another word to Richard, he began walking directly toward her, leaving the pharmaceutical executive standing alone with his hand still extended. "Excuse me," Dr. Sterling said, brushing past Richard as if he were a piece of furniture. The crowd parted before the distinguished doctor like the Red Sea, everyone eager to get out of his way, while simultaneously craning their necks to see where he was going. Whispers followed in his wake. "Why is he walking toward Elena? Does he know her? That doesn't make any sense." Richard stood frozen in place, his face cycling through confusion, embarrassment, and growing anger. He had just been publicly dismissed by one of the most important doctors in Chicago, and everyone had witnessed it. Tiffany watched from the stage, her champagne glass trembling in her hand as Dr. Sterling approached her sister. This wasn't part of the script. Elena was supposed to be humiliated, isolated, shown for the failure she was. She wasn't supposed to have connections to people like Dr. Sterling. "There must be some mistake," Tiffany called out, her voice higher than usual. "Dr. Sterling, I think you're confused. That's just my sister, Elena. She's been away for quite some time." Dr. Sterling didn't even glance in Tiffany's direction. His focus was entirely on Elena, who was watching his approach with an expression that might have been relief mixed with something else. Anticipation, perhaps. Martha gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. Nothing about this made sense. Eleanor had been gone for 10 years, living God knows where, doing God knows what. How could she possibly know someone like Dr. Sterling? "Dr. Eleanor Whitmore," Dr. Sterling said as he reached her, his voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom. "I apologize for the interruption, but when I received your invitation, I simply couldn't wait until tomorrow." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Dr. Elena Whitmore, not just Elena, Dr. Elena. Richard's face went from red to white to green in the span of seconds. He had just tried to impress a woman who apparently outranked him in ways he was only beginning to understand. "You invited him?" Martha's voice was barely a whisper, but in the absolute silence of the ballroom, it carried to every corner. Eleanor's composure finally cracked, just slightly, allowing a hint of warmth to enter her eyes as she looked at Dr. Sterling. "Jonathan, you didn't have to come tonight. I know how busy you are." "Nonsense, Doctor," Sterling replied, reaching into his jacket pocket. "What you've accomplished, What you've given to the world, it couldn't wait another day." He withdrew a small, elegant box from his pocket, the kind that usually contained jewelry, but somehow seemed to hold something far more precious. The entire room leaned forward, straining to see what was inside. Elena glanced around the ballroom, taking in the shocked faces, her mother's confusion, Tiffany's growing panic, and Richard's dawning horror. For the first time all evening, she allowed herself a small, genuine smile. "Perhaps," she said quietly, "it's time they knew the truth." Dr. Sterling opened the elegant box with the reverence of someone handling a sacred artifact. Inside, nestled in deep blue velvet, lay a gleaming gold plaque that caught the chandelier light and seemed to glow with its own inner fire. The room collectively held its breath as he lifted it carefully from its resting place. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Sterling's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to addressing medical conferences and hospital boards. "I realize this is highly irregular, but the Global Medical Council couldn't wait another moment to present this recognition." The silence in the ballroom was so complete that the soft hum of the air conditioning seemed deafening. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving, frozen in place like statues holding silver trays. Dr. Sterling turned the plaque so the room could see the inscription, though only those closest could make out the words. His voice rang out clear and proud. "Dr. Elena Whitmore, in recognition of your groundbreaking development of the Vitalis compound, which has saved over 2 million lives worldwide this year alone." The sound of a fork hitting a china plate echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot. Mrs. Henderson's hand had gone limp, and her dessert fork clattered onto her plate as the words sank in. Around the room, similar small sounds marked the moment when reality shifted for each guest. Vitalis, the miracle drug that had revolutionized treatment for degenerative diseases. The medication that cost $800 a month and was worth every penny because it gave people their lives back. Elena's Vitalis. Tiffany's champagne glass slipped from her nerveless fingers, shattering against the marble floor in a spray of crystal and golden liquid. The sound seemed to break the spell that had fallen over the room, and suddenly everyone was talking at once, their voices a confused babble of shock and disbelief. "That's impossible," Tiffany whispered, but her voice carried in the acoustics of the ballroom. "She's been gone for 10 years. She doesn't have a job. She doesn't have anything." Dr. Sterling continued as if he hadn't heard her, his attention focused entirely on Eleanor. "The pharmaceutical patents alone are worth hundreds of millions, but more importantly, your research has given hope to families who thought they had none, including," he paused, looking directly at Martha, "your own mother." Martha's face had gone completely white. Her hands shook as she gripped the edge of the table, and for a moment it looked like she might faint. The pieces were falling into place with devastating clarity. Eleanor had disappeared 10 years ago, right around the time Martha's condition had been diagnosed. Right around the time the doctors had told them there was no cure, no treatment, no hope. And then, 3 years later, Vitalis had appeared on the market like a miracle. "No," Martha breathed, her voice barely audible. "No, that's not..." She couldn't have... Richard stood frozen in the middle of the ballroom, his face cycling through expressions of horror and realization. As a pharmaceutical executive, he knew exactly what Dr. Sterling was talking about. He had been prescribing Vitalis for years, making commissions on every prescription, building his reputation on the success of a drug that Elena had created. The woman he had just publicly humiliated. The woman he had dismissed as a failure. The woman whose medication he had been taking credit for providing to Martha. Dr. Whitmore spent the last decade in research facilities across 3 continents. Dr. Sterling continued, his voice growing stronger as he sensed the impact of his words. She turned down lucrative positions at major pharmaceutical companies to focus on developing treatments for degenerative diseases. She lived in laboratory dormitories, worked 18-hour days, and sacrificed everything most people consider important in life. Elena finally spoke, her voice quiet but clear. "I couldn't watch my mother die knowing I might be able to save her." The words hit Martha like a physical blow. She made a small wounded sound and pressed her hand to her mouth, tears beginning to stream down her cheeks. "The irony," Dr. Sterling said, looking around the room with something that might have been amusement, "is that Mrs. Whitmore has been taking her daughter's medication for the past 7 years. Every pill that kept her alive, every day of extended life she's enjoyed, has been a gift from the daughter she thought abandoned her." Tiffany was backing away from the stage, shaking her head in denial. This is insane. This is some kind of joke. Elena is nobody. She's nothing. She ran away and left us to deal with everything. She ran away to save your mother's life, Dr. Sterling said simply. And she succeeded. Richard finally found his voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. I've been selling Vitalis for years. I've made hundreds of thousands in commissions on my sister's work, Elena finished quietly. On the medication I developed to save our mother's life. The ballroom erupted in whispers and gasps as the full magnitude of the situation became clear. The pharmaceutical executive who had been bragging about paying for Martha's medication had been profiting from the very drug that Elena had created. The daughter they had painted as selfish and abandoning had sacrificed a decade of her life to save her mother. Martha rose unsteadily from her chair, her legs shaking as the truth crashed over her like a wave. Elena, she whispered, reaching out toward her daughter. Oh God, Elena, what have we done? But Elena wasn't looking at her mother anymore. She was looking at her watch again, and that small, mysterious smile was back on her lips. Actually, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the stunned ballroom, there's one more thing you should know. Elena accepted the golden plaque from Dr. Sterling with steady hands, her fingers tracing the engraved words that represented a decade of sacrifice, sleepless nights, and unwavering determination. The weight of it seemed to anchor her as she looked around the ballroom at the faces of people who had spent the evening judging her. The one more thing, Elena said, her voice carrying a strength that hadn't been there before, is that as of this morning, I signed the final papers transferring the Vitalis patent to a medical foundation. She paused, letting the words sink in. A foundation dedicated to providing life-saving medications to patients regardless of their ability to pay. Richard's face went from pale to grey. As a pharmaceutical executive, he understood immediately what this meant. Millions of dollars in potential profits gone. His commissions on future Vitalis sales eliminated. The drug that had built part of his reputation and wealth was about to become freely available to anyone who needed it. That means, Elena continued, looking directly at her mother, that your medication will never cost $800 a month again. It will never cost anything again. No mother will have to choose between medicine and rent. No family will have to depend on the charity of others to keep their loved one alive. Martha's legs gave out completely, and she sank back into her chair, tears streaming down her face. The magnitude of what her daughter had done, not just the scientific achievement, but the sacrifice, the generosity, the pure love behind it all, was overwhelming. Elena, Martha whispered, her voice breaking, I called you selfish. I said you abandoned me. I let them humiliate you in front of everyone, and all this time, I was trying to save your life, Elena finished gently. I know it looked like abandonment. I know it felt like betrayal. But I couldn't tell you what I was doing because I didn't know if it would work. I couldn't give you hope and then take it away if I failed. Tiffany stood frozen on the stage, her perfect makeup streaked with tears she didn't remember shedding. Everything she had built her identity on, being the good daughter, the one who stayed, the one who sacrificed, crumbled around her. She had spent 10 years playing the martyr, while her sister was actually saving their mother's life. I don't understand, Tiffany said, her voice small and lost. If you were doing all this, why didn't you tell us? Why did you let us think? Because I needed you to take care of her while I was gone, Elena said simply. I needed to know she was loved and supported while I was working. I needed to know someone was making sure she took her medication, even if you didn't know where it came from. The truth of it hit Tiffany like a slap. Even her role as the devoted daughter had been orchestrated by Elena. Even her moment of superiority had been a gift from the sister she had spent the evening destroying. Dr. Sterling cleared his throat gently. If I may add something, he said, addressing the room. Dr. Whitmore could have made billions from this discovery. Pharmaceutical companies offered her contracts that would have set her up for life. She turned them all down because she believed medicine should heal, not bankrupt. Eleanor looked around the ballroom one more time, taking in the opulent decorations, the designer gowns, the faces of people who had judged her based on appearances and assumptions. When she spoke again, her voice was calm, measured, and devastatingly quiet. I spent 10 years in laboratories that smelled like antiseptic and failure. I lived in dormitories with concrete walls and fluorescent lights. I ate cafeteria food and wore the same 3 outfits for months at a time because every penny I had went into research. She paused, her eyes finding her mother's. I missed birthdays and holidays and phone calls because I was trying to buy you more time. Martha was sobbing openly now, her carefully applied makeup running in dark streaks down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." "I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty," Elena continued. "I'm telling you this because I want you to understand that love doesn't always look the way we expect it to. Sometimes love looks like staying, sometimes it looks like leaving, sometimes it looks like paying for expensive parties, and sometimes it looks like living like a monk for 10 years to save someone's life." She turned to Richard, who was still standing in the middle of the ballroom, looking like he wanted to disappear into the marble floor. "Richard, thank you for taking care of my mother. Thank you for making sure she never missed a dose of medication. I know you profited from it, but you also made sure she stayed alive long enough for my work to matter." The grace in her words somehow made Richard's humiliation complete. She was thanking him for doing what any decent person would do, while she had been performing miracles. Eleanor walked slowly toward her mother, her heels clicking softly against the marble. When she reached the head table, she knelt beside Martha's chair and took her mother's trembling hands in her own. "I never abandoned you," Eleanor said softly. "I was never more than a phone call away. I just couldn't come home until I had something to bring with me." Martha pulled her daughter into a fierce embrace, 10 years of misunderstanding and pain pouring out in her tears. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you so much, and I'm so proud of you." Eleanor stood slowly, helping her mother to her feet. She looked around the ballroom one last time at the faces of people who would never see her the same way again, at the sister who was still crying on the stage, at the brother-in-law who had learned that success and worth weren't the same thing. "The treatment is on the house, Mum," Elena said with a small smile. It always was. As mother and daughter walked together toward the ballroom doors, the crowd parted before them with a respect that had nothing to do with money or status, and everything to do with recognizing true greatness when they finally saw it. Behind them, the party continued, but it would never be the same. Sometimes the most powerful victories are the quiet ones, where love wins not through confrontation, but through the simple, devastating power of truth. Hey there! If this story touched your heart, hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible tales of family, love, and unexpected twists. Drop a comment below and let me know what city or state you're watching from. I love connecting with viewers from all over. Thanks for being part of this amazing community.